Hello, everyone. My name is Jordan Smith. I'm the digital editor for the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund. We're a not-for-profit organization that deals with First Amendment and First Amendment adjacent cases protecting the comics community. And today I'm very excited. I'm joined with Pamela Jackson and Elizabeth Pollard. They have agreed to talk to me a little bit about comics at San Diego State University, comics at SDSU. So I'm going to hand the ball over to them and just ask you both if you could give us just a brief background of yourselves and how you initially got involved with comics.
Sure. So I'm Pamela Jackson. I'm the popular culture librarian at San Diego State's Special Collections and University Archives. I have a double master's degree in English and library studies. So in many ways, my job working with comics here feels like I've come full circle with my career. So I get to work with that literature and librarianship. So that's pretty cool. I've worked as a faculty member and an academic librarian in the Cal State system for 19 years. And in 2011, when SDSU started more seriously collecting comics, I was able to develop that collection and also my role as pop culture librarian. So we kind of invented that role for me. Personally, where I came to from comics, I grew up reading comic strips more so than comic books, with the exception of, I remember having Felix the Cat comics. That's my all-time favorite character. But on Sunday mornings in my household, the entire family would fight over the Sunday funnies in the newspaper, and I was the youngest. So you can imagine how that went. And I think I've done okay for myself now, and I've shown them.
I can attest to Pam's love of cat comics. My kids call her Cat Pam, and not in the sense that she will be eaten by one when she is old, but because she loves lots of cats. So Cat Pam. So I did my PhD. I'm Beth Pollard here at San Diego State. I did my PhD in ancient history at the University of Pennsylvania, and my doctoral thesis compared the representations versus the realities of women's use of witchcraft in ancient Rome, so like 2,000 years ago. And so despite what you might think, it's really not that big of a jump to go from looking at the representations and realities in the ancient world, how they relate to one another, these very old ideas, to the way that those old ideas about witches and women make their way into representations of witches in popular media, including comics. So it was a really easy jump for me to go from that original research to what I'm doing now with witches and comics. This is my 20th year at San Diego State University. Pam, we've been here a long time. It's about time we do something fun. Where I've been teaching and researching topics in Roman history, world history, and now the long history of sequential art, going back to cave paintings from tens of thousands of years ago. So how I first came to comics, apart from similar stories to what Pam describes of fighting for the Sunday funnies, I have really vivid memories of reading my brothers Sergeant Rock and Beetle Bailey. My brothers were real big comic fans, and I read a lot of Beetle Bailey and Snoopy compendia sent to me by an uncle who lived in Japan. So it was really weird because you read them from back to front, and the word balloons were in Japanese, and then there were English subtitles. So it was kind of a weird entry into comics. This is like, I'll admit it was in the 70s. And very recently, speaking of a 70s story, my mom unearthed from my childhood closet, I don't even know, it must have been like an archaeological dig, a 1977 Wonder Woman collection, the one with the Gloria Steinem introduction that I had gotten for my 7th birthday, might have my 6th birthday. And I very proudly wrote my name, my full name, right underneath Gloria Steinem's, and I misspelled my name. So apparently I've liked comics before I could spell my name properly. So I think this was meant to be. Pam, that's new. You haven't heard me say this before. This was last weekend. My mom sent me pictures of this book. I thought it was pretty hilarious. But so we've been doing this a long time, and we're happy to do something fun, I think.
That's excellent. Thank you for the introduction. Yeah. So for those folks who are watching this and don't know, could you tell us a little bit about Comics at SDSU and also the origin story of Comics at SDSU?
Sure. So I think our origin story has a bit of a windy road. I would say that it started to some degree tracing back to 2017 when it's not when I first met Beth, actually. I met you on my first day on this job 16 years ago, I think.
I do remember that.
Yeah, but back in 2017, we were hosting Beth's classes on witchcraft studies in special collections. They would come for a class visit. We have things, items from the vault, like we have a Malus Maleficarum from the 1400s, these herbal manuals. And she asked, can the students look at witchcraft comics along with these historical texts and everything? So we had tables filled up with ancient texts all the way up to here's a bunch of modern comics that look at witchcraft studies. So I think it started somewhat back there with Beth and I collaborating on this, and her interest in like having students look at comic books as well as historical texts. And I knew she was nerdy before that in a good way, because I would run into her on the floor of Comic-Con every once in a while, and like little babies and strollers, and I was like, that's Beth, hey. So we started there. But then it was, 2019?
Somewhere in there. Yeah, it depends on what you count as the beginning.
Right. So we started having conversations about working more with comics. And then in 2019, we formed a grassroots effort. It's gone through a couple of name changes, but we are now Comics SDSU, our Comic Studies Collaborative, a grassroots effort of faculty from all across campus, from multiple different interdisciplinary colleges, who come together and are willing to build a program and to build more curriculum and research and raise the visibility of comics on our campus. I'm sure you have more to add to that.
Yes. No, it's funny. I remember it a little differently. It's funny when you talk to two people about an origin story. I remember Pam singing this Sirens song from Special Collections. We have witchy comics. Don't you want to see our witchy comics? Come see our witchy comics. So she's a great advocate, evangelist for all things comics, for everyone's topic. But I think we did get down to business more formally in late 2019 when we wrote up what I guess maybe just academics call a white paper to outline, to articulate our goals for this comics working group. We knew that there were a lot of people who were teaching and researching, outreaching to the community about comics, but we wanted to talk about how could we strategize that to make a bigger impact. And Pam's right, around fall 2019, we started having 3 times a semester meetings, which continued shockingly with very little hitch all the way through the pandemic, talking about what we were doing with all of those aspects of our work, the teaching, the research, the outreach. And we're starting to do a lot more special events, especially as we emerge from our isolation, and because you can't say post-COVID, because I don't know when there's going to be a post-COVID, but since April 2020, we've been, I don't think Pam mentioned this, we've been, when I jumped up and tried to stop my telephone, since April 2020, we have been competing to be something called a President's Big Idea here at San Diego State. And that competitive process has really, I would say forced, but it's encouraged us to crystallize and package what we're doing to apply for external funding and get a spotlight on what we're doing here. And we've started to have success with that, including the grant that I think we'll talk about with you in a few minutes. So yeah, we also have a comic that's being made of our origin story. That's cool. A tease. I'm teasing right there. So we have a comic that's being created by a local comic book studio that works with kids in the area to create comics, and that's one example of our outreach, actually. So we will have an outreach. We will have an origin story very soon.
That's very cool. Well, why don't we talk about the grant right now? So the Institute of Museum and Library Services, they offer grants to museums and libraries, policy development and research. And Comics SDSU was just awarded a grant. So congratulations, that's super awesome. So do you want to tell us a little bit about what the grant will enable you to do?
Sure. So what we have is a national forum grant, and the forum grants are intended to start nationwide conversations. And so in this case, we're looking at pulling together public librarians, academic librarians, and comic scholars nationwide to form a network of research librarians who support comics and social justice. So we have an additional aspect to it that we're looking at. We're going to have three kind of like focus groups. The first one will be gathering librarians here in San Diego County. So from school districts, various types of colleges and universities, and public libraries across the county. The second is going to do something similar with academic librarians who work with comics nationwide. And the third will bring together comics scholars from around the nation. And our goal in these meetings is to uncover what's happening in academic libraries and with comics scholarship across the country when it comes to teaching and learning with comics. Get some ideas. Our grant is to kind of mine the field, create a network so people can start talking to each other, know who, does this library do this with their comics and this library does that. I think that's been a little bit of a void in academic librarianship. I've had to try and figure out what other libraries are doing with their comic book collections to decide what might work for us for best practices and that kind of thing. And to identify what the needs are. So especially from an academic higher education perspective, I know K-12s and public libraries do a lot of this work already, but from a higher education perspective, what is needed when it comes to comic studies and scholarship on a campus? And then those projects that we identify will be fodder for future grants or other organizations that do that type of work that want to go, okay, people need that, let's do it.
Yeah, and we kind of feel like what we've done with Comics at SDSU, I keep sort of leaning to the side and pointing to the icon behind me. One of the things we've learned is that you should have a brand, like branding. You need to have an icon and all the rest. But one of the great things about Comics at SDSU is that we've in some ways established a proof of concept for what we want to do with this grant in terms of bringing people who are already doing great things together to talk about those things that they are doing. And we've started to reach out to the CSUs and run sort of trial runs of how we can lead these focus groups to get people talking about what they're doing with comics. And we really want to know what folks dream of doing, what the librarians and what the academics, what they really want to see happen. And this grant is going to give us that opportunity to create that network of dreamers around social justice and comics, makers, creators, as well as academics to see what is needed in libraries to make those dreams come true. So it's a lot of fun.
Something that I think is incredibly interesting about the project is that it's working with higher education. I feel like so many times the conversation around comics and education, it's usually K through 12, and it tends to focus on English literature. So I'm curious how comics have been applied at SDSU and from the different schools you've talked to, like what subjects are being covered and how the comics are being used in the classroom.
Sure, I think we could both answer that one to some degree. I think in higher ed, we're seeing comics used across the curriculum, both for critical study and comics creation. So instructional faculty are interested in the power of the medium, and students are responding well to engaging with that type of content in the class.
And I should say right now, Pam, as the librarian, one of the great things of having a librarian at the heart of this initiative is Pam knows what's going on everywhere because everyone comes to the library to get access to these materials. So Pam is like this wonderful sort of central node of information. But I interrupted. I know you have great things to say, Pam. Yeah, she knows everything.
I actually appreciate this.
Yeah.
So we have at SDSU, for example, we have comics specific courses or comics that or courses that have a lot of comics coverage in the curriculum. We're seeing them in Africana studies with an Afrofuturism class, art for both creation and critical analysis of comics as an art form. The English and history departments are very well represented in having comics classes. We've seen in rhetoric and writing studies, classes that look at gender and rhetoric that use comics, a single panel comics, for example, in that class, and then just women's studies looking at pop culture from a feminist perspective. And in addition to those classes that I think are a little more focused specifically on comics, we see a lot of smaller assignments and little segments of courses across campus that include part of comics. And then next semester, for the first time, our American Indian Studies department will be teaching a comic book Indians class for the first time. that's going to look at both positive and negative representation of Indigenous peoples. And then I think Beth can talk more about this, but we're working toward the creation of a comic studies program, certificate program, maybe a minor, maybe a major. That's a big goal for us. And then there's a lot of newly proposed classes in the works. Do you want to talk about that? Because it's kind of
yes. I would love to talk
the curriculum part of this.
Yes, I will talk about that. One of the things we learned as we started to pull together our collaborative and work on this grant is that, as Pam was saying, so many people were doing a lot with comics. You know, when we would try to say, let's talk about using comics in the curriculum, they would say, oh, I'm doing that, but it was sort of scattershot and it was unclear. Is it, one assignment? Is it half the course? What is it? So one of our big goals is to create that certificate leading towards a minor, leading towards a major. And Pam described it as a goal. It's more than, it's going to happen. We're going to make this come into being, and we have a lot of great classes in the works. I taught a new course, Comics and History, for the first time in fall 2020. It took about 2 years to get it on the books, but the teaching of it was just so gratifying, with students incredibly excited to engage the long history of sequential art. And that was, again, I was talking about proof of concept with our collaboratives. That was sort of our proof of concept that these courses can be serious, they can be meaningful, they can do something that you might not otherwise expect. And so this year we have a lot of courses going through the curriculum approval process. One is a graphic history course. So it'll be a dedicated class looking at the range of new graphic histories and memoirs that are making such a splash in the field of history. And what we're really excited about is there's a graphic history course, but then there's a separate graphic novel course being developed in English and comparative literature, which will focus on the range of graphic novels. Pam already mentioned the Native Americans in Comics course in American Indian Studies. And each of these is going to form a really important part of the certificate program that's going to build student capacity. Now my assessment hat just went on. I've been an assessment coordinator. So whenever you start talking capacities and measures, you know that you've gone into professor, institutional speak. Yeah, exactly. No, but I really do think we'll have this ability to build in students this capacity to see what's happening in a comic. Not just flip through it for the storyline, but to see that rich interplay of text and image that's so important to the medium. To engage the basics of comics creation, and to go from that to work into students learning how to work in the biz. Developing courses in we have a really strong business college here, so developing a business of comics course, a graphic nursing or graphic medicine course in our nursing program, a comics for teachers. Thinking about that K through 12, so many. San Diego State trains a lot of teachers for the state of California, a very robust credential program here at San Diego State. And so developing a comics for teachers course. And to be honest, we're going to learn from K through 12 teachers who are currently teaching in develop that course to help new teachers teach with comics. We're fully aware that there are people out there who know a lot more than we do about some of these topics, and we want to bring them together to develop those courses and to help us create our certificate, then minor, then major.
And we should also say that the history and comics class that Beth mentioned is a general education course. And what's cool about that is it might be housed in, it's cross-listed in English and history. So those are the departments that teach it, but general education classes count towards your GE credits. So students from across campus are taking those classes. So we've found, like, one of our great students, he just started a comic studies club. He's the president of a brand new club that he created, is a biology major who took Beth's class because he was interested in comics and was like, cool, I can do that for my GE class. And so that's been really exciting because that, I guess, like, in a way, having a GE class is campus's way of saying, yeah, this is serious study. We agree with this. And we're seeing hundreds of students each semester go through this class now. So, yeah.
And it is hundreds of students taking this comics and history class, which is just amazing when you think about it. We're designing this curriculum so that there is a scattering of courses in the general education program, so that students will engage comics in an attempt to satisfy their GE, and then realize, wait, I can get a certificate in this and do a cluster on comics. So again, we have plans within plans. So lots of good stuff going on with comics classes and comics curriculum.
Cool. We're just sort of related to this, in the past week alone, we've seen a bunch of challenges to comics in K through 12. And in addition to people responding to the comment that's in the comics, there's also been a question about the validity of comics and the validity of using comics in education. And so I was curious if either of you have experienced any pushback from this like expanding use of comics in education, and if you have, what you've done to sort of like counteract or push back against the pushback.
So I have not seriously anyway.
I dare someone to push back on Pam Jackson.
Yeah, right. Bring it. I'll explain why comics are important. No, but I haven't really encountered that very seriously at the higher ed level. I mean, we do talk about there's still that lingering, like, is it art kind of question. But I've encountered some outliers on staff, for example, who will say, like, why do we have all these comics? Or who think that things that are fun aren't also hard work and valid areas of study. Sometimes you have those fun sponges. But by and large, I think our faculty and administrators have been largely supportive of using comics in higher ed. So I haven't seen that so much here. The university even chose a comic book as our common read last year. So we used George Takei's They Called Us Enemy, and that was the common read that was programming and everything integrated across campus. So
that's really great.
I think that given our proximity to Comic-Con in San Diego and that being part of our community, and we have so many other aspects in San Diego that are comics focused, our collections in the library being, that's one of our specialties in the library. I think it's just like, it makes sense here. And so I don't see it a lot here. Every university is going to be a little different. So I think that may be one thing we find out with the grants. Are faculty at higher education levels having that problem? Maybe, so we'll find that out. But I think that I hear more of those horror stories in K-12. And they're held to differences because they have the, whatever Common Core standards that state is using, that you have to like integrate all that, and books being challenged and banned, and, there's the content and all of that. So I think that they struggle with that a lot more than we do at all here in higher ed.
Although I think I might encounter it a little bit more when I go out and try to talk about comics in an academic setting, the traditional kind of professional gathering of historians. So sometimes I'll get pushback and from people I just wouldn't expect it from. So someone will misinterpret comics as meaning something funny, or a comic strip that they've encountered in a newspaper, or that the medium of comics has one genre, namely superheroes, not recognizing that it's a medium with so many different genres. Also, although I love CBLDF's Raising a Reader, and completely agree. I love that. I got it on Free Comic Book Day a few years ago and shared it with my daughter. I share it with my students. And I completely agree that comics are a vital gateway to literacy of all sorts, with words and with images. Sometimes I'll hear someone really well-meaningly suggest, oh, it's in comic form, so kids are going to read it, looking at a graphic novel or some sort of story. And while that may be true, I think it's a point of view that undersells the seriousness of comics, and how comics and graphic novels can deal with mature topics in mature ways. Other times I've presented about comics at a panel, like an academic gathering, and had someone come up to me after the panel. That was fun, with the implication that, well, where's the serious stuff? Yeah. And so, I think it's important when we think about these challenges to think about how you can push back on them. And apart from sending Pam their way, I think we can correct these misinterpretations by sharing examples. So the range of genres within the comics medium, and showing that it is so much more than superheroes, the range of serious graphic novels and comics, like They Call This Enemy, that Pam was just referring to, and also the hard-hitting, insightful scholarship that's done in the field, both in monograph form and in article-length treatments. So I think it's really easy to push back against that, but we have to do that. We have to challenge these ideas that, you know, they're funny, they're superheroes, not serious, you know, and that there is.
That's a really good point, Beth. Yeah, the superhero thing is something I encounter often in classes when I'm, you know, having students come to special collections. You'll hear comments like, because that's what people think of as a comic book. It's all about superheroes, or, you know, you got Marvel, DC, and that's it. It ends there. But even with those, when you start treating them in a scholarly fashion and looking at them with that critical eye and the critical lens and like how it's presented and everything, you can get to a lot of the meat that, oh, okay, so it's not just a superhero comic. It's about this, this, and this. So yeah.
It's like, not only are comics a gateway to literacy, but superheroes are a gateway to comics. And so it works really well for the kinds of classes we're teaching. I don't think I mentioned that the history and comics class that we developed is a social justice course. So we've been digging into the ways that sequential art has dealt with social justice issues over time. And so we can use comics, you know, even superhero comics like a Luke Cage, and say, look at this from, you know, the early 1970s, and then show, you know, something like Christian Cooper's It's a Bird from really recent, you know, Bird Watching While Black, and show this evolution of social justice topics within the comics medium. So it's a serious medium. I always have to force myself not to say genre. A serious medium in which there are so many genres that can engage really important issues.
And I think from the library point, the way that I would be doing more of that with the students too would be exhibits. So when we do comics exhibits, and we've done quite a few of them, whether they're smaller ones or big full-scale major exhibits that stay up for a year, those are more scholarly, and they treat the subject that way, looking at diversity and issues like that in comic books. So that, I think, is a way to position them where anyone who comes, and our library is very busy, it's centralized on campus and constantly packed. Everyone who comes in and sees that and is like, oh, fun comics, and then they start reading the, oh, this is serious stuff. So you're
working on an exhibit right now, right?
Yes.
Ooh, can you tell us what it is?
Yeah. So we have a faculty member in American Indian Studies who has a collection of, he's been collecting his own comics of representation of Indigenous people, and he's going to do an exhibit for the month of November, might last a little longer, on that. And it'll be a pop-up, it's more of a pop-up exhibit as a teaser to something that we'll probably do in about a year and a half. That'll be a major one. That'll be a big event that stays up for a year. Usually when we do those kind of exhibits, we have guest speakers come in all year, ties in with the curriculum and classes so that they can engage with the material that's on display and everything too. So a couple of big ones coming up.
Well, and San Diego State is very excited about this Mission Valley project that's been taking shape, a new campus, a couple of trolley stops away, that will have an exhibit space, a performing space. And this is when Pam starts to get sick to her stomach, I'm sure. But with more exhibits, bigger exhibits at a different spot than your library. but you know, I think we're going to have an opportunity to share a lot more of this with the city of San Diego and beyond. It's again, great things in the works.
Yeah.
Speaking of the exhibits, I read in one source that the collection at SDSU is over 100,000 pieces. And I was curious how the collection got started, what you do about acquisitions, if there's a focus to the collection. If you could just tell me a little bit more about the collection at SDSU.
Sure. So a decade ago, our original comic book collection totaled to about 1,800 titles, a little under than that with our floppy comics, at least. Those were mostly undergrounds. We had some in the circulating collection, you know, just random, whatever someone happened to buy for the most part. So that was where we started back in 2010. That same year was the 40th anniversary of Comic-Con, and the library began talking with Richard Alf, who was one of the co-founders of Comic-Con, and he agreed to donate his archive to SDSU. So we have that now, which includes a lot of planning documents and memorabilia from the very earliest Comic-Cons. And Richard and Mike Towery, who's another Comic-Con co-founder, helped us at the time pursue an NEH Cal Humanities grant to collect the oral histories of the founding of Comic-Con from their founders and their early attendees. So that's a project called the Comic-Con Kids Finding and Defining Fandom. And I was put on as PI for that. So that's how I got involved initially, got moved into a new job at SDSU. So that grant was coupled with the hiring of a new library dean back in 2011. So that's what really jump-started our collection and outreach efforts with comics. When we started promoting our work and opening the collection up to donations in 2012, we went from about 1,800 issues to more than 60,000 single issue comic books, or floppies. In addition to bound collections, graphic novels, it all brings our total up to about 100,000 titles, not including our archival collections. We have archival collections that are like the Richard Alf collection about early fandom. And then we also have a comics and science fiction fandom collection that has memorabilia and ephemera and everything, like things all that stuff they pass out at Comic-Con, we collect that and keep it. And it could be an interesting study for marketing, like how things were marketed, what was popular that year, how television shows like got their viewers in, all of that stuff. So that's got some pretty neat stuff in it.
Yeah, hence that business of comics course that we want to develop that can dig into this collection and do so much with it.
Yeah.
Now, Pam, a lot of it has to do with, I mean, now you're at a collections management situation, right? Where you can't just take anything, but you have to be really,
every time
really
I do an
deliberate,
interview, I'm always scared, like everyone's going to crawl out of their garage with their comic boxes and say, will you take these? And we want to, but we also have to be responsible, make sure we're not duplicating what we already have. And make sure it's the right home for their materials and everything. So I'm being a little more selective than we were for the last 9 years, where we went from 1,800 to 100,000,
Right. Well, and storage is an issue, right? You've got that great background.
We don't have infinite space. Yeah.
So
the campus would have to build us a separate library just for comics if we want to keep going.
So if anyone's listening,
that's a great idea.
Like what's wrong with that? But
someone please build us a library for our comics.
You never know, it might happen.
Yeah.
That's great.
We'll give you contact information.
So where do both of you see sort of the future of comics and education going?
Yeah, I mean, when I was thinking about whether you were going to ask us something like this, all I could think of was Kelly Sue DeConnick's 2014 Carol Danvers, Captain Marvel, higher, further, faster, more. I mean, that's the future. We've already talked about their integration into K through 12 curricula, and those K through 12 teachers are doing such incredibly innovative work with the materials. And what that means for us at the college level is that our students come into our classes and into the collection with a far more nuanced sense of the medium. They've read more. They've read a lot. They've read things we've not read. They have a high degree of comics literacy. They've made comics. They've done it with paper and pencil. They've done it with digital drawing programs. So our starting line is moving farther down the field. So we can do more at the collegiate level. We can go into greater depth with the materials. The focus of our classes can get far more tighter. So it's not, history and comics through all time, but as Pam was mentioning, an American Indian Studies course, a a Cold War comics course, a manga course. So we're getting the ability to just be far more focused. What I hope to see in the field, I want to see more programs like ours, developing comics across curricula, showing the power of comics to change the world one reader at a time. I want to see more connections across those programs. So there's a network of folk who are doing this work and not a lot of wheel reinventing at every institution. And I want to see more access to comics. And I know this as a curator, Pam, you struggle with this all the time, but more access, digital and otherwise. There are those great gatherings of comics. I think what is it, Comic Book Plus, that has the Golden Age comics available to readers, but more of that. Comics are expensive. It's hard to get your hands on some of those comics from the 1960s onward if you don't have access to a great collection and a curator like Pam. And so what I hope for the future of comics, again, is just more access, more programs, more connection across these programs. Well,
and I think what you said about the collection too. So our collection was developed almost entirely by the generosity of donors. And so it focuses a little heavily on modern age superheroes. It's been harder to get our hands on some of the older comics like Beth was mentioning. So Golden Age, people don't really want to just donate the best collection in the world. Like, here's our Golden Age, you know? Yeah. So that's been a little difficult. And it was a struggle with COVID because everything suddenly went online and we had all these plans for these classes. And how do you do that? And so it was a learning experience and finding what was freely available out there. How could we provide access to students? And then there are some off-the-shelf products that a lot of times, like the public library has, oh gosh, I'm drawing a blank on the title of it, but there is a database of online comics, and a lot of public libraries have access to it. But when we investigated it at the academic level, the pricing models are prohibitive. So we couldn't get access to that. So just even doing interesting things, like our students are still members of the community and can go get a public library card, but they need someone to explain that to them and tell them how to do it. So that's one of the roles that during COVID, I was like, okay, you go to the public library, you sign up, you get a card, and then you can access this database, you know? So things like that, I think that there's a lot to be worked out collection wise with growth for comic studies. And then a lot of the things that Beth said, I mean, I love what we're doing here. And anytime we've talked to faculty or students from other universities, they're always so excited. The people who like comics are like down for it on their campuses. So they've been kind of that's where we did a focus group or started a conversation with all the California State University faculty who work with comics. We brought them together in a virtual show. And it was like people were hungry to have these conversations, to build this community, to do more with comics in education. So
yeah, I sent out an invitation to the people I could figure out were doing comics at the CSUs, and there are something like 21 CSUs, and we found a couple of people at each of the California State Universities to invite, and I would say half of them within an hour wrote back and said, yes, I would like to be a part of this. And I had picked like a random day, a random hour, and just said, we're going to have a conversation on X day at X hour, and like literally half of them within an hour wrote back, yes, we're there. It was just a hunger there that we hope we can figure out a way to feed. And I think that is the future of comics, finding a way to do that.
And to
comics in the university, I think.
I mean, I'm all about learning for learning's sake. Yeah. That's why I never left academia. I got my degrees and stayed. But realistically, I think that we're going to need to be able to explain why a degree in comics, for example, when we get there, is important to an employer. If you're not going, like, what does that mean? Even if you're not going into the comics industry, what can that degree do for you? The critical thinking, that aspect of it, the mixed media, all of that. So being able to articulate that, I think, is going to be important soon too.
So with all these exciting updates, how can people keep track of what Comics SDSU is up to? How can they see, what's sort of coming up down the pipeline? What's the best way for people to sort of track what you're doing?
So this is where we have a flash on the screen. we have a website for our collaborative, comics.sdsu.edu will take you to our website that has everything we're up to. New blog posts. We have a lot of student researchers who write blog posts for us, so that's been very fun. Events, as we hold events, we put those up there. We've also been asked to co-host a lot of events now, so we'll be posting those there as well. Comics at SDSU on Twitter is very active. Beth runs that for us.
Oh no, you've outed me as the
sorry,
as the Twitterata.
Don't know is behind that.
Exactly. And the Twitter, so at Comics at SDSU is one of the ways that we try to showcase things that are going on with the collection. Sometimes when we're really together, we did a post a day during Women's History Month of like all different kinds of comics, and we're hoping to build into doing more and more of that. We have student assistants now who help us develop that content. So comics.sdsu.edu is our website. At Comics at SDSU is our Twitter. And we would be remiss if we didn't point out that a part of our grant, this IMLS grant, is developing a separate website to share the grant deliverables, the network analysis that we're building of who's doing what with comics and social justice in different kinds of libraries. But again, that will always be linked from that website, comics.sdsu.edu. So definitely check it out and we can learn more.
Pamela and Beth, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today. I really appreciate it. And just like the best of luck with everything going forward. I can't wait to see as more people get connected and there's more collaborations happening. Really looking forward to see how that goes. So
thank you.
Yeah, best
Thank
of luck.
you.
So thank you very much.